All right, let's dive right into this explainer. Have you ever wondered why those textbook negotiation tactics, the ones that work flawlessly on your home turf, often fail spectacularly the second you cross a border? Well, today we're decoding the invisible boundaries of global business, and we're using the groundbreaking insights from cultural communications expert Erin Meyer and her book, The Culture Map.
Okay, picture this. Tim Carr. He's an American manager for a defense company, and he's negotiating this massive deal with a really high-level customer in Saudi Arabia. Tim does literally everything right by the Western rulebook. He separates the people from the problem, focuses on interests over positions, the whole shebang. He carefully navigates this marathon phone call, and boom, finally, his counterpart agrees to the terms. Success, right? So Tim naturally does what any good American negotiator would do. He verbally recaps the agreement, step by step. But when he finishes, nothing, just dead silence. Finally, a soft but incredibly firm voice comes through the receiver. He says, "I told you I would do it. You think I don't keep my promises? That I'm not good on my word?" Click. The deal was completely dead. See, Tim's detailed verbal recap, which is just standard everyday practice in the US to make sure everyone's on the same page, deeply offended his Saudi counterpart. Unintentionally, Tim sent a loud and clear signal. I don't trust you.
So, to make sure we don't end up like Tim, we've got a clear roadmap for this explainer. We're going to cover the cultural minefield, decode the culture map framework, look at navigating conflict, examine two distinct types of trust, and finally, closing the global deal.
All right, part one, the cultural minefield and why your standard tactics just aren't enough. Here's the core issue we face in a globalized economy. What gets you a quick, enthusiastic yes in one culture, that exact same move might get you a firm, permanent no in another. We are constantly sending and receiving these really subtle messages, but without the right cultural context, we completely misinterpret those signals. To actually make sense of all this, we can look at Erin Meyer's 8-scale framework. She analyzed global business challenges and nailed down these 8 specific dimensions that dictate how we interact. It covers everything from whether we communicate explicitly or rely on reading between the lines, all the way to how we fundamentally view time itself. Every single culture falls somewhere along these spectrums. Understanding exactly where your counterpart sits relative to you, that is your secret weapon.
Moving on to section 2, decoding the culture map and visualizing the scales. Let's see how this actually builds by looking at a few of these specific dimensions in action. When you visualize these extremes, it suddenly makes sense why we sometimes feel like we're speaking entirely different languages, even when everybody in the room is speaking English. It's absolutely fascinating to look at how different cultures handle negative feedback. Take the Dutch, for example. They are trained to give the message completely straight, honest, frank, blunt. Now move toward the middle of the scale and you hit the US. Americans are culturally trained to wrap positive messages around negative ones. The classic feedback sandwich. So what happens? An American might walk away thinking a Dutch manager is incredibly rude, while that same Dutch manager thinks the American is being totally fake or just completely unclear.
Now, let's look at leadership and decision-making. You'd probably assume an egalitarian culture naturally relies on group consensus, right? Well, not always. Check out the outliers here. American culture is highly egalitarian. Bosses and subordinates mingle all the time. But decisions? Those are largely top-down and invested in the individual. Conversely, look at Japan. Highly hierarchical, right? They respect an immense distance between the boss and the subordinate, yet their decision-making is deeply consensual. They use systems where literally everyone has to align before moving forward.
Okay, section 3, navigating conflict and emotion and handling disagreement across borders. Knowing how decisions are made is one thing, but what on earth happens when things get heated? Let's explore Meyer's rules of thumb for international negotiations, starting with how we express disagreement.
You really have to listen closely to the words people use when they disagree. Linguistics experts actually call these upgraders and downgraders. Russians, Germans, and the French, they love upgraders. If your Russian counterpart tells you he completely and totally disagrees with you, don't panic. For them, that's just an invitation to a fun, lively debate. But if you're negotiating with Mexicans or the Japanese, they use downgraders to soften the blow. So if a Mexican counterpart says they disagree a little bit, you better pay attention because a massive deal-breaking problem might be brewing right under your nose.
And here's another huge trap. We have to separate confrontation from emotional expressiveness. Let's take Germany. They embrace this concept called Sachlichkeit, basically objective, calm confrontation. They'll tell you that you are absolutely wrong, but it's purely about the facts, zero emotion attached. On the flip side, consider Mexico. Highly emotional, passionate, lots of gesturing, but they actively at all costs avoid open confrontation. In Mexico, showing emotion proves you're honest, but disagreeing strongly, that's taken as a deep personal insult.
Which brings us to Section 4, 2 types of trust, the head or the heart. The real question is, how do you actually build the trust needed to navigate those conflicts? Well, it reveals a fundamental divide in global business.
In places like the US, the UK, or Germany, business relies heavily on cognitive trust. This is trust that comes from the head. You build it by simply doing good work. You know your stuff, your product is top-notch, you show up on time, and you deliver. Do those things, and I trust you. We basically draw a sharp, professional line separating our emotional lives from our practical business dealings.
But if you go to most emerging markets, from the BRIC countries to Southeast Asia, Africa, and the Middle East, cognitive trust simply is not going to cut it. They rely on affective trust. This comes from the heart. It means we laugh together, we relax together, we see each other on a genuine personal level. Literally, only when I feel affection or empathy for you do I actually trust you enough to do business with you.
Consider an Australian manager named John Katz. He was really struggling to negotiate a joint venture in China. He tried building trust the cognitive way, answering questions transparently, providing loads of data, working incredibly hard. It was completely failing. Finally, a consultant gave him some really blunt advice. The problem is that you need to approach them from a relationship perspective, not a business perspective. You won't get what you want unless you develop trust differently. To succeed in relationship-based cultures, you literally have to invest heavy time in meals, karaoke, tea. You have to let your guard down and show your human side. Build the friend first, and eventually the deal will follow.
All right, on to our final section, closing the global deal and getting to yes across the globe. You've navigated the communication styles, you've managed the conflict, you've built the right kind of trust. Now for the final hurdle, actually getting a yes or no and putting ink to paper.
Here's a wild fact. Asking a direct yes or no question can actually be a massive trap. Take this Danish executive. He asked his Indonesian suppliers straight up if a specific deadline was feasible. They said yes right to his face, but then emailed days later to say no. The Dane felt totally lied to. But here's the context. In Indonesia, it is considered incredibly rude to look someone you respect in the eye and just say no. Instead, they signal it through body language, maybe an extra beat of silence, or by saying something like, "We will try our best." As the listener, you're supposed to read the air and understand that it's actually a polite no.
Now contrast that silent Indonesian rejection with the French. An Indonesian manager was completely shocked when his French counterparts reacted to a request with the rapid-fire no, 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 no. He literally felt like he was being slapped. But guess what he found out later? They were actually totally happy to agree to his request. In France, a flurry of no's is often just a cultural reflex. It just signals a desire to have a spirited, rigorous debate about the details before formally agreeing. And finally, beware of the written contract. In the West, a 20-page legally binding contract closes out the negotiation phase. It essentially means we don't have to trust each other anymore, we just trust the legal system. But in emerging markets, definitely not the case. One African manager actually felt insulted by written recap emails, viewing them as proof that she wasn't trusted. Meanwhile, American managers were absolutely furious when their Chinese suppliers wanted to reopen contract points weeks after signing. You see, to the Chinese, the contract was just a dynamic, flexible starting point for a relationship that's going to evolve, not some final lockdown. So, as we wrap up this explainer, I really want you to take a hard look at your own global interactions. The trust you build, the subtle messages you decode, and your ability to adapt your own style, these are what will dictate your success. Are your usual tactics truly getting you to a global yes, or are you unknowingly breaking the deal before you even reach the starting line? Keep the culture map framework in mind, and you'll be navigating those invisible boundaries like an absolute pro.